Right, so today we are going to be talking about symbols in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Okay, so the first symbol that I want us to talk about is probably the most obvious one. It has to do with the setting itself. It is the forest. Now, you typically think of a forest. A forest can either be very pretty if it's daytime, the birds are singing, it's very natural, but at nighttime it can be a little bit creepy and mysterious. So that's kind of what it represents here, is that mystery. The fact that the characters aren't fully aware of how they're being manipulated. Now, the other thing that the forest can represent is leaving society behind. You think about how the very beginning of the play takes place in Athens, but from there they leave society behind, and that's when all chaos starts to break loose. We have this quote, "And I am to entreat you, request you, and desire you to con or learn your parts by tomorrow night and meet me in the palace wood, a mile without the town by moonlight." And that's Peter Keats that says that. So we have all these characters that are meeting in the forest, which, like I said before, is something that represents mystery and the fact that they are leaving society behind. Next up, we have the second most obvious symbol, and that is the moon. So the moon has very many different symbolic uses, but here specifically in A Midsummer Night's Dream, it represents the passage of time. It represents that element of magic and nighttime. So Shakespeare's time, you couldn't perform plays at night because they didn't have electricity, and they couldn't afford candles to light the stage, so all their plays took place during the day. So because of that, they had to use a lot of imagery talking about the moon to kind of bring forward this idea and the imagination in the audience that this was taking place at night. Like I said before, the moon also represents fantasy. We have lots of exotic creatures that depend on the moon. You think like werewolves or fairies who come out to play in the moonlight. And by extension, that also represents magic. It also represents this element of dreaming. The next symbol that we have, if you couldn't guess by the picture, is, of course, the flower. Now, it's not specifically said in the play, but more than likely the flower that they were talking about that creates this love potion was a purple pansy. We look at you'll see the little quote that I added at the bottom, where Oberon is telling Puck where to find the flower. He says, "Yet marked I where the bolt of Cupid fell. It fell upon a little western flower, before a milk white, now purple with a love's wound." So, not only does the flower represent love, it also represents the pain associated with love. You'll notice on the first bullet I put the chaos of love. You could also say the inconstancy of love, the fact that love is not a stable thing, especially in this play. And thus, by extension, it represents how fickle love is. And it also kind of points out the difference between real love versus fake love. We have, for example, Helena, who is very truly in love with Demetrius, and we have Lysander and Hermia, who are very much in love with each other. But as we get into the play, you'll notice that this love potion messes with people's idea of what love really is, and kind of question their idea of, well, is this the person that I really love, or is it someone else? Next up, I want us to talk about animals. I never said I was a good drawer. Now, animals play an interesting role in the play in that they represent the kind of perceived danger of the forest. We have Oberon, who talks about all the different kinds of animals that live in the forest, like bulls, apes, monkeys, bears, lions, all kinds of crazy things that wouldn't normally live together. Hint, hint, wink, wink. That means that it's a fantasy. But this whole perceived danger of the forest is kind of like made fun of by the other characters. And to give you guys a specific example of how it's made fun of, Act 2, Scene 1, we have Demetrius on line 214 when he says, "You do impeach your modesty too much to leave the city and commit yourself into the hands of one that loves you not, to trust the opportunity of night and the ill counsel of a desert place with the rich worth of your virginity." Now, the little scandal comes in, because if we translate that, he's basically saying that Helena is risking her reputation by leaving the city and stalking someone who doesn't love her. Standing alone in a deserted area in the middle of the night isn't the best way to protect your virginity. And then later on, Demetrius says, "I'll run from thee and hide me in the brakes and leave thee to the mercy of wild beasts," which is meant to offend her and meant to, make her scared of the forest because all these wild animals live there. But good old Helena, we know her response. She says, "The wildest hath not such a heart as you. Run when you will, the story shall be changed." Which is basically saying the wildest animal isn't as cruel as you are. So these very real dangers of the forest, these wild animals that live there, are just poked fun at and used as like a punchline by the other characters. And lastly, we have one of the more ambiguous symbols. It is the symbol of sight. Sight is something that's, again, messed with a lot in the play. We have these characters who think they see things, or might see two people together and kind of misconstrue a situation. Like I said, like I'm writing here on the screen, what characters see isn't always the truth. For example, we'll read later on, when Lysander accidentally gets the love potion wiped on his eyes, how he falls in love with Helena. That creates a whole awkward situation between the characters. So sight kind of also represents this confusion between dreams and reality. We have characters at several times saying things like, what kind of a dream is this? And then we also have Hippolyta saying at the very beginning of the play, 4 days will quickly steep themselves in night, 4 nights will quickly dream away the time. So this whole idea of what we see and not being able to believe in our senses kind of adds to that confusion between dreams and reality. So lastly, I'd like to ask you guys, what is another symbol that you notice in the play? Hopefully you guys have been taking notes in your notebooks. If you haven't, feel free to rewind and go back through. But I'd also like you to to look through and see if you can't find another symbol that's used in the play. I remember a symbol is something that represents something else. So you might have like an object that represents a certain idea, and maybe you just, write down how they use that in the play.